welcome back to the world of Spirit and Shield. As always, my name is John and I will continue to be your guide on this journey. So last week we had a story called The Men Who Fight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did not get a chance to see it, I'll go ahead and put a tag up here and go ahead and check that out. Before watching this video, there might be some spoilers and I don't want to ruin anything for you. We are going to be discussing some of the inspirations and answering some questions and comments that you had about the story. For the rest of you, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So the initial reason that I wrote this story, or wanted to write a story like it, was that I wanted to practice writing combat scenes. But I was actually thinking about this maybe like a year or so ago when I was reading The Witcher. I've only read like the first 2 books. I would love to read the rest when I have time. I love the story, love the characters, the world building, the writing for the most part. I did not like the way that the fight scenes were written. They seemed more like they were like a choreographed dance. In your head, you're not getting the feeling of the fight. You're getting placement of individuals during the fight, which isn't really that important. And for me, it kind of like took me out of the world that Sapkowski created and had me like looking in as a reader again instead of someone right there with Geralt and the rest of the gang. So I wanted to kind of try it myself and see if I could do any better. So The Men Who Fight is kind of like my first attempt at that. I tried to go with, for the most part, short sentences. Like there are some longer ones with description of where people are, what they're doing, and I think that's necessary on some level. But I tried to stay with very short, quick sentences and a lot of action words. So I'm not really sure how well I did. I hope I did all right. Let me know what you thought of them. If you did not see it, go back and watch it and then let me know. But yeah, so that was initially why I started writing this. Well, like most stories, it became something else as we went along, which is wonderful. It's again like why I'm really doing this, to explore my own writing and to explore this world. But this story ends up becoming not just an experimentation with combat writing, but it becomes Messner's journey from being a civilian to becoming a soldier. And we can really see this largely through his dreams. And so at the beginning, it starts off and he's dreaming of his family. Like there's some very like pastoral scenes. Everything's kind of like warm and fuzzy. He sees his mother, his little sister. Then after he experiences combat for the first time, although like at a distance, when he sees the Cambrians and they're all covered in blood, and they're smiling, and that especially disturbs him because those aren't two things that we typically connect. And so from that point on, he's not able to see his mother's face in his dreams. She goes to pull the bread out of the oven, turns around, and it ends. And with those dream sequences, I wanted to show that he's drifting further and further away from his civilian life, from his life essentially as a child. And of course, mothers are associated with like your childhood and a sense of innocence. So I thought that would be a kind of like a nice way to show his transition. And so we get to the end of the story, and Messner is now a full-blown man-at-arms. He is no longer a civilian. And it's not necessarily the fact that he kills that completes that transition for him. It's the fact that he was willing to in order to protect his comrades, the other men-at-arms. It's that willingness to kill that really is the transition. What we see at the end of the story, he again goes to sleep, but he doesn't dream at all. And this is meant to be both a good thing and a bad thing for him. Anyone who's done this before, especially anyone who's been in the military, knows that it's hard to live in two worlds. The worst thing, at least for me, was the points where you were in between soldier and civilian life. For example, like when you're home on leave, because again, like I can only speak from my own experience, but I was constantly kind of on edge. Like you're waiting because you know you're just going back. You're sitting on the fence. You're sitting between two worlds, which is the most uncomfortable place to be. Um, so Messner no longer is in that place. He is for most of the story, where he's kind of straddling the two worlds. But at the end, he is fully a man at arms, and he is separated from his civilian life. So in that sense, it is actually a good thing for him that he does not dream. In another way, his inability to dream at the end is a negative thing. He sees the world in more realistic terms now. He's no longer, that young romantic that, we all often are growing up, where we have these big dreams, we want to change the world. And we see that, like he initially, like he volunteers to go to the Broken Pass and fight because he wants to make a difference. And, we see Rudolph kind of like mocks him for it. He's like, just another kid. But then towards the end, it's not about politics, it's not about ideology, it's about protecting the guys next to him, which essentially is a more realistic approach to to war and combat. And if you talk to most soldiers, that's what they will say matters. Like when it really comes down to it, it's not the politics, it's not trying to spread democracy or whatever. You're protecting the guy next to you. You're doing it for your buddies. A lot of the other influences for this story come from my time in the military. For example, like it starts off, with this guy saying, "I'll break your arm." This absolute stranger goes up to Messner and threatens to break his arm. It's like, what in the world? And that happened to me. It was in basic training. We'd been there for like a few weeks, and this guy who I knew, but like we'd never talked before. Like he was in our platoon, a different squad though, and he just comes up to me one day and says, "Hey Smith, I'm gonna break your arm." And I'm looking at this guy like he's like not really bigger than me. Like we've had no hostile words to each other before, so I had no idea what was going on. Still never found out quite what that was about. We did fight later in controlled circumstances, and it was basically a draw. And after that, he, kind of like left me alone. We were like friends after that. It was just like the weirdest thing. So for some reason, like that stuck with me, and I thought it'd be kind of like a nice way to start this off, grab your attention, and kind of throw you into this new world of the men at arms. The character of Deccan is also largely based on a real person. Unfortunately, I can't actually remember his name. We were in training together, and like the initial part of training, like you're essentially just sitting there waiting to get all your gear, get all your like shots and all your paperwork done. So a lot of it is just standing in lines and waiting. But I remember we were getting ready to go from this kind of like sorting facility. We were getting ready to go to our actual like basic training site and meet the drill sergeants who would be the bane of our lives for 10 weeks. And so this guy, like we're sitting in an auditorium, and he seriously left the auditorium like 4 or 5 times to go to the bathroom. And I was watching him because like we were buddies, despite the short time that we were together. But yeah, so I was watching him and wondering like, holy crap, like this guy's like seriously terrified, like to the point that he can't control this. But it just amazed me, and it actually helped calm me, even though like I was nervous too. Like you have no idea what's gonna happen ahead. And but yeah, seeing this other guy freaking out that much more than me kind of calmed me down. So it was nice, but not so much for him. Towards the end of training though, he did kind of find his feet, and he ended up doing very well. Much of this story focuses on some key differences between military and civilian life, and that's a theme that is going to continue throughout the world of Spirit and Shield. The Broken Pass is essentially Afghanistan in a lot of ways. There are some differences, but that is largely what I'm basing this conflict off of. And we see some examples of that in the Mamaki tunneling under the roads. Essentially, those are IEDs. I was thinking about giving them bombs, but again, they're supposed to be kind of like a very primitive people, so that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense unless they got them from someone else. But tunneling made perfect sense, and in this way, it also kind of references the war in Vietnam, where like the Viet Cong would use tunnels to move their soldiers unseen by American forces. The idea of having these more or less permanent forts and bases in this like foreign land comes not only from Afghanistan, where I heard the Canadians actually had an ice rink at Bagram Air Base, but it also comes from ancient history, where the Romans had like frontier forts essentially. And these towns grew up around them, and essentially you'd have entire generations of quote unquote Romans growing up away from Rome. People who considered themselves Roman but had never been there. So in those times you had a divide between like the real Romans and like the fake Romans. In this world, that's going to be very important as well. There's going to be this growing cultural divide between the people growing up in Hellenica and the ones growing up in the Broken Pass, even though that will be a small minority of like the general population. And I didn't want to get too far into that in this story, but future stories will explore that a bit further. We do see a glimpse of that divide where, like when the soldiers first enter the base, they see a temple. Like they haven't seen a temple forever, and it's something that's considered to be very, very old and backward, very archaic. But in the Broken Pass, the rules are different. The world is different. Another thing that we see that kind of shows the divide between the soldier and civilian life is the way that they deal with death, especially for Messner. Not only death in the sense of dying, but also in the sense of killing. And again, for Messner, that's one of the big conflicts for him is the decision to kill, which he gets to the end of the story and he realizes that it wasn't his decision. These guys are trying to kill him and his friends. So what is he going to do? He's going to protect them. And that actually comes from my own experience. I was kind of playing around with the idea of pacifism while I was in the military, which is not really not the best place to do it, but I guess it's one of the most appropriate places to. But we were in a training event, and they told us like, all right, guys, this is as real as it gets without actually getting into the real thing. So take it seriously. Conduct yourselves the way that you would downrange. And so in my head, like before we started this training, I was thinking like, all right, so this is actually like a good chance to practice, to see if my idea of pacifism will actually work. And so before we went out, I told myself like, I'm not going to kill anyone. I'm going to go out there. I'm not going to fire a shot. By the end of the training, I had not only run out of ammunition, I was reaching for an enemy weapon to keep fighting. And that was when they blew the whistle, like, all right, guys, let's clean this up, head back. Considering, like, I went into it planning on not firing a shot, that was kind of a surprise to me. And when I thought about, like, the series of events, like, I didn't have much of a choice. It was, like, fire back or, like, see the guys around me get killed, which was also not an option. So the idea that, like, in situations like that, it's not up to you. It's kind of scary, but at the same time, it's real. Essentially, like, everyone likes to say, like, oh, well, not everyone, but some people I know like to say, like, oh, if, someone broke into my house, like, I wouldn't hurt them, offer them a cup of tea or something. When it comes down to it, though, it's not always your choice. So Messner experiences that in this story, and he kind of comes to terms with the situation he's in and what he has to do in that situation. So let's go ahead and switch gears and talk about some of the weapons and the armor. It was largely influenced by not medieval times, but even further back. You look throughout history, spears played a major role in warfare, and I think it's a shame that they are so underrepresented in fantasy worlds. I was actually watching a video by a guy, I'm not sure if this is his actual name, but his YouTube name is Lindy Beige. If you haven't seen his stuff, go ahead and check it out. He covers a wide range of stuff from from history, modern stuff, and some HEMA. So one of his videos, and I'll try to find it and put the link down below, he's talking about, like what is actually better, a sword or a spear. And he's got his group of like HEMA students, and he has them go against each other and he keeps tally. And he shows pretty much just how effective spears are in most situations. But then he also gets them in two groups of like spearmen with shields, and he has them go straight at each other, and they're poking and they're just hitting each other's shields, and it's actually very difficult for them to land a hit on another person. So after that, he does another experiment where he has them go forward, like same situation. When they get close, he says, all right, now don't stab the guy in front of you, stab the guy diagonal. So they start doing that, and what happened was when one guy would go to stab someone on the other side, they would leave themselves open to an attack from someone diagonal to them on the opposite side, in the opposite group. So I saw that and thought, wow, that makes too much sense. And while I believe it's important to have a lot of fantasy elements in fantasy, I think it's equally important that it be realistic, especially for me in terms of like weapons and tactics and armor. Some of the fantasy weapons and armor that you see is just absolutely so far over the top. No one would be able to walk, let alone fight in that stuff. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I'm more of a realist. I want my fantasy characters to be able to move. So this video from Lindy Beige was actually very, very inspirational for me as far as this goes. And we see that in the story where the soldiers are not trained to like go right in front of them. They go diagonal to protect the guy next to them. So like another series of videos that I saw on YouTube that really helped me out in fleshing out this world was on arrows versus armor, which is something that I was really kind of struggling with in this world, trying to figure out the fighting style in different regions and different conflicts. And you'll find out more about that in the future. I don't want to give away any spoilers. One video in particular that I was watching, they were testing the effectiveness of arrows on plate armor, which is supposedly like one of the more superior types of armor. And it's got like a nice curve in front, and so you're seeing these arrows not only bounce off but shatter as they hit this armor. And the arrows were made by someone who was supposedly like a very good, I think Fletcher is the correct term. The bow was being fired by a professional archer. It was in the class of war bows. I think it was like 120, 130 pound draw strength. And so like this is not lightweight stuff. And even moving up to a distance of, I think it was like 20 meters, maybe even closer than that, they were firing this bow at this armor, getting direct hits, and most of them weren't even denting the armor at all. And none of them did anything that would probably even leave a bruise. So I was watching that and thinking, well, geez, what if, because like I had already decided that I'm going to have these like armored war wagons in this world, which, by the way, war wagons were actually a real thing, and they would use them as defensive forts while on the move. So that is not something I made up. That is something from history. So go ahead and check it out. It's actually very fascinating. With this idea of war wagons, I decided, well, why not put an archer up on top? Also influenced by turret gunners in Humvees and like other armored vehicles. So then I was thinking, well, what if this guy is just so heavily armored that he can't actually be killed by an arrow? So that's where we get the armored archers up in the rat nests. And essentially the way that I'm viewing this is that, the guy's up there and arrows are just bouncing off of him. And it's probably not the most comfortable position to be in, but he can kind of watch around and, at least let people know what's going on around them. So those videos on YouTube actually were very helpful for me. I'll try to find the actual videos and put them down in the link below. What I do in the world of Spirit and Shield is a lot of combining things. I'm trying to create something new. So we have a lot of influence from modern history, influence from my own personal history, and that's where a lot of the emotion comes into it, because that's stuff that I can actually feel, and I don't have to guess too much at it. They're real, just not in that situation or that context. So taking modern history, modern events, my own personal experiences, ancient history, and some fantasy elements, and kind of combining them all together into this brand new fantasy world. So we're going to keep doing that, keep trying to create new things. So next week we do have a brand new short story coming out. It's called Before the Petals Fall. So I hope you join me for that. Until then, continue to follow me on social media. Links are down below. If you feel like it, go and support me on Patreon. Link is down below as well. And thank you for all of your support in all shapes and forms. And I guess that's all for this week. Take care, and I will see you later. Goodbye.